Legendary blues artist Robert Johnson dies at the age of 27 under very mysterious circumstances.
Before he died, he crawled on his hands and knees and barked like a dog.
As they say, they slipped him a Mickey.
He dies penniless and unknown, and at the time, no one could have predicted the value of the music he left behind.
It's the greatest rags to riches story in the history of rags to riches stories.
Or the number of people competing for a piece of his estate.
You know, he just pops up out of nowhere saying that, hey, I'm Robert Johnson's son.
Leaving a trail of broken hearts behind him. It's not easy to know who's telling the truth about this enigmatic ladies' man.
People today may not know Robert Johnson by name, but if you mention, he's the guy that sold his soul to the devil, they've all heard of that.
Robert Johnson is considered the most influential blues musician of all time, inspiring the likes of Eric Clapton, Led Zeppelin, and even Mick Jagger. He was among the first to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and has been credited with laying the foundation for rock music. Even more amazing is that the man who accomplished so much was only 27 when he died. August 16, 1938, Greenville, Mississippi. Robert Johnson lies inside a stranger's home, doubled over in pain. No one knows for sure what's wrong with him. Only 3 days before, he was performing at a country dance hall. Johnson has been playing gigs in the area since July. He has good reason to stick around. A woman has caught his eye.
Apparently, he had taken up with a woman here in Greenwood who was the wife of the man who ran the juke joint out at Three Forks. Robert Johnson would approach a woman if he liked her, if he was attracted to her. It didn't matter whether she was married, if her husband was sitting right next to her. He'd make a play for her.
What happens next is uncertain, but there is one popular myth.
And of course, the owner wasn't too crazy about that. He knew that Uncle Robert was a drinker. And so, as they say, they slipped him a Mickey.
And as legend has it, it happened during a performance at the juke joint.
Robert was brought an open bottle of whiskey, and as he began to drink, it was knocked from his hand. And he told the person who knocked it from his hand, "Don't ever knock away a bottle of whiskey from my hand." And they said, "Don't ever drink from an open bottle. You don't know what could have happened to it." And then when another bottle open was brought to Robert, he drank from it.
No one knows for sure who served Robert the spiked drink, but one of the most common beliefs is that the juke joint owner did it because he was racked by jealousy. Hours later, he becomes ill.
He attempted to play some requests from people who knew his records, and he eventually collapsed and was taken into a back room and laid down.
Back in the United States, and particularly in the South, in the 1930s, the murder weapon of choice was arsenic or cyanide. People didn't have guns. Not that way.
Robert is taken into the home of one of his female fans, but no one can afford to bring in a doctor. After 3 days of excruciating pain, he dies.
Well, from all reports, before he died, he crawled on his hands and knees and barked like a dog.
His death certificate reads, "No doctor" as the official cause. Robert's body is reportedly buried in a graveyard nearby, where he will remain relatively forgotten for the next 30 years. Much like his death, the life of Robert Johnson is shrouded in mystery. It starts in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. 1910, Robert Johnson's mother, Julia Major Dodds, has been abandoned by her husband. She starts up an affair with field hand Noah Johnson.
I was told by Robert Johnson's half-sister that whenever Mr. Johnson would come around to visit his mother, she would ask little Carrie and whoever else happened to be around the place at that time to go outside and play for a while.
Enough of this, lady.
Well, you know what?
Soon, Julia is pregnant with Noah Johnson's child, but the good times don't last. Robert Johnson is born on May 8, 1911. But Julia doesn't stay with his father, Noah. 5 years later, she remarries to a farmer named Dusty Willis. Robert's half-sister Carrie helps her mother to raise him and his other siblings. As a teenager, Robert develops a passion for musical instruments, in particular the harmonica and jaw harp. It causes friction with his stepfather, Dusty.
Dusty always wanted Robert to work, and Robert always wanted to get out of it and find other things to do.
Carrie, on the other hand, encourages her brother's interest in music and even buys Robert his first guitar.
The relationship between my grandmother and Robert Johnson was very close. She spoke of him often and very fondly so.
But Robert doesn't take up music full time. He falls in love with Virginia Travis, and they marry in February 1929.
I think Robert focused on her and having a family and settling down. He was not a professional musician at that time. He was a wannabe. He was very much enchanted by music and loved it, but he was willing to be a farmer for her.
Before long, Virginia is pregnant. The newlyweds are happy, but a year after they are married, things take a dark turn. Virginia dies in childbirth.
It was the end of a lot of things for Robert. He had wanted to be a farmer, but certainly only for her. And he wanted to have this baby, very likely because he loved her so much. And it just wasn't going to happen. She was gone.
Where's the baby? Where's the baby?
The baby, too, is gone. Virginia's family and the community blame the deaths on Robert's love of the devil's music. In his grief, music is the only thing that can console Robert.
And so the next thing we know about Robert is that he's gone. He's in a little place called Martinsville in southern Mississippi, back down where he was born. And it was there that he was, his fire was lit for this kind of music that he was going to be involved in.
Johnson's music may take away his grief, but he won't have long to enjoy his success.
John Hammond wanted Robert Johnson to appear at a concert at Carnegie Hall in New York in 1938.
But Johnson was dead by the time Hammond sent the word out to bring him to New York.
Blues musician Robert Johnson is devastated by the death of both his wife and child. He turns to music to deal with his grief, beginning a journey that would later turn him into a legend. (1930) Mississippi. Robert Johnson travels throughout the Delta, playing music wherever he can. He's known for charming the ladies every place he goes.
He liked to mesmerize the women, as I would say. Married, single, it didn't matter. He was, when he performed and he got a little looker in him, he was a woman's man.
In 1931, Robert marries Coletta Callie Kraft, an older woman with 3 children of her own.
She took very good care of him. She brought him breakfast in bed. She cooked for him and washed for him and did all sorts of things that a wife would do for a man, and he loved it.
But this time, Robert is unable to settle down. He leaves and never comes back. 5 years later, in 1936, Robert heads to Jackson, Mississippi to become a professional musician. He eventually meets Ernie Ortle, a talent scout for the American Record Company.
And it was through Mr. Ortle that Robert Johnson was eventually taken to Texas to record.
Robert records 16 tracks, including Kind-Hearted Woman Blues and Sweet Home Chicago. Decades later, musicians like Keith Richards would be in awe over Robert's unique sound.
He could play a guitar with 2 hands and make it sound like there were 2 guitars being played by 4 hands. No one has ever figured out how he did it, to this day. There's an interesting story that is told that he faced the wall while he made those recordings. Some people think that he just wanted to concentrate. Some other people think that he didn't want anyone else seeing his technique.
One of the tracks was Terraplane Blues, which turned out to be Johnson's biggest hit. It sold 5,000 copies. Now, in those days, for a rural recording of black blues played in solo acoustic style, that was a lot of records. So he became a household name in the households that appreciated that kind of music.
The following year, Johnson records Traveling Riverside Blues and Hellhound on My Trail. Robert is paid in cash for the songs, but never receives any royalties.
He wasn't making much, if any, money. He may have made a few $100s from the recordings he made in 1936 and 7, but he was essentially a pauper.
Record companies did own the rights. They paid for it, and that was it. They owned it. They paid you to make the records, and see ya.
Producer and talent scout John H. Hammond hears Robert Johnson's music and searches him out.
John Hammond wanted Robert Johnson to appear at a concert at Carnegie Hall in New York in 1938.
After spending years playing to small crowds in country dance halls and juke joints, it would be his largest show to date. But then on August 16, 1938, Robert Johnson dies.
Johnson was dead by the time Hammond sent the word out to bring him to New York.
After his death, Robert remains in the shadows, a distant memory until 1961, when Columbia Records releases his album King of the Delta Blues Singers. It's not a commercial success, but does influence aspiring musicians like Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton.
He was a revolutionary, he was a pioneer, he had a style like none other, and he wrote music like none other. Today, he is credited with having laid the musical foundation for rock and roll.
But it takes another 13 years before Robert Johnson's notoriety really takes off, thanks to music historian Steve Levier.
I was working in a record store in Las Vegas in 1961 when the very first King of the Delta Blues Singers came out on Columbia Records. It was the first full album devoted to a pre-war blues musician. And my coworker asked me, she said, "Have you heard this record?" And I said, "No." And she said, you better listen to it. It took me quite a while to get used to listening to Robert, but of course once I did, I saw the beauty of it and loved it ever since. But that first album didn't tell me much about Robert Johnson, so a mystery is building in my mind.
In 1973, Levier tracks down Robert's half-sister Carrie. They strike a deal that will turn Robert Johnson into a blues legend.
I did some research and found out that the intellectual property that she had inherited from her brother, which were the compositions, they had never been copyrighted, and so the songs were still available. And I said, by the way, do you happen to have a picture of your brother? And she said, you know, I do. I said, great, I want to see that too.
In fact, Carrie possesses the only known photographs of her brother, and they will become extremely valuable.
When Carrie Thompson brought that photograph of Robert Johnson and put it in my hands, I took one look at it and I said to myself, is this an album cover or what? It was a remarkable photograph. He's all decked out in a pinstripe suit and a hat, patent leather shoes, and a guitar that looks like it's seen 40 miles of bad road, and it was just a great, great picture.
November 20th, 1974. Inspired by the photographs, Steve Levier proposes an idea to Carrie.
I told Carrie that I thought we could do something remarkable for both of us. She had the inheritance, I had the energy and the time.
Levier wants to ensure that Carrie can represent Johnson's interests and sign a deal. As Johnson's only living sibling, Carrie believes that she is her brother's next of kin and tells this to Levier.
Carrie Thompson represented that she was the sole heir of Robert Johnson, and she believed she was. She didn't know of anyone else, and she thought she had good reason to know if there would have been anyone else.
Robert Johnson's sister Carrie enters into a contract with Levier, handing over her purported rights to 2 photographs and, more importantly, all of Robert's musical works and recordings. Typically, agents earn roughly 15 to 25% at most, but Levier gets 50%.
Agents often get a cut, but they don't get ownership. Somehow or other, Levier succeeded in getting Carrie Thompson or her lawyer to agree to this.
Steve Levier insists everything was above board.
She had an attorney. I asked her if she had one. She said yes, and I said, okay, we'll have your attorney communicate with my attorney and we'll write an agreement that essentially gives me the right to do what I want to do with this property. And she said, okay, so that's what we did.
But I think what is so important with Levier's efforts is that he made sure that the music and the photographs were copyrighted, which had never been done.
With Robert Johnson's music rights and photographs in tow, Levier starts shopping for a record deal.
I called John Hammond at Columbia Records and told him what I'd found, and he was very excited about it, and he said, we've got to do something with this. And I said, well, great, that's the way I feel. I think we ought to repackage both of the King of the Delta blues singers with this photograph on the cover of both of the albums.
But the process is slow going, and Carrie is frustrated with the deal.
In 1980, she became very unhappy with Levier. She felt he hadn't performed, he hadn't accounted, she had not received any money, nothing was happening.
Carrie decides to overturn the contract.
Levier tried to renegotiate it, he tried to make a new deal with her. He hoped he could change her mind.
But whether or not the contract was actually rescinded is unclear.
Carrie Thompson did make some efforts to try to rescind the contract, but she never did. She hired a number of attorneys, but the contract that Carrie Thompson signed with Steve Levier was never rescinded.
There is, I believe, a significant argument that the contract was rescinded and that Levier, at that point, no longer had any authority as the representative of Carrie Thompson. He believes he does, and we are still arguing that question.
Levier continues working on the re-release of Robert Johnson's work. And it's about to go big, making some people very rich while leaving others out in the cold.
She didn't receive anything, but very little money for what she did. There's been Grammys issued, awards issued. She got none of that.
Rock and Roll Hall of Famer and blues icon Robert Johnson passes away without leaving a will or any known descendants. Half a century later, agent Steve Levier signs a deal with Johnson's half-sister Carrie to turn her brother into a household name. Steve Levier works hard for the release of Robert Johnson's music, but it's slow going.
As Steve Levier worked with Columbia, they had some turnover, and people would come and go, and there'd be some interest in the project, and then nothing would happen. Steve Levier wouldn't give up. He continued to push for Columbia to put out the complete recordings.
By 1981, Carrie is growing ill, and she issues power of attorney to her half-sister Annie C. Anderson. In February 1983, Carrie dies. In her will are two codicils. One states that she has rescinded her contract with Levier, while she leaves Johnson's music and photographs to Annie and her grandson, Robert Harris.
Annie Anderson was appointed by Carrie Thompson as what's in Maryland called her personal representative, which is the equivalent of the executor, the person who administers the estate. And Annie and Robert were named as her sole heirs in equal parts.
But since the validity of the contract is unclear, Levier carries on.
So he continued to act on behalf of the contract, claiming that he didn't know who her heirs were.
Annie Anderson files the will in Maryland, hoping the judicial system will help her fulfill Carrie's last wishes. But as the heir presumptive, she may not have been Robert Johnson's successor in the first place.
Mrs. Anderson was a half-sister of Mrs. Thompson, but she was no kin to Robert Johnson. We might say here in the South that she was on the other side of the family, but they are the ones that opened the estate. Mr. Harris was a relative, only a very collateral and distant relative of Robert Johnson.
Carrie Thompson's rights to her brother's estate were never questioned before because at the time of his death, his estate wasn't worth anything. But there's about to be more to fight for. In 1990, Columbia Records finally releases the 2-CD set of Robert Johnson, the complete recordings. Levier is listed as producer, and the album goes platinum. It even wins a Grammy Award for Best Historical Album. It generates more than $2 million, but with Robert Johnson's heir still undetermined, Annie and Harris don't see any of it. Instead, half of the royalties get funneled into the Johnson estate.
It's the only set of pre-war blues records that has attained that number of sales.
Despite his success, the secret behind Robert Johnson's talent remains a mystery. New Africa, Mississippi, 1931. Broken after the death of his first wife, Virginia, Robert Johnson now has only one thing on his mind: learning to master the guitar. Robert meets noted blues musicians Son House and Charlie Patton, though he fails to impress them.
Whenever they would put down their instruments, he would pick it up and try to play something, and he was just awful. Son House said people would come to me and say, "Man, go get that kid off of that guitar. He's driving us crazy." So Son would have to go in the juke joint and say, "Man, put that guitar down. You can't play nothing."
Robert is more determined than ever to master the guitar.
He went away for a while and came back, and he was doing all these different riffs and chord progressions and everything. They couldn't explain how he could not play one minute and then the next minute he could play better than everybody else.
It's said that upon his return, he's able to play any song in any genre after only hearing it once. It seems to happen so quickly that it raises suspicion. Legend has it that Robert Johnson's talent came from making a deal with the devil himself.
Apparently, you were supposed to go down to a crossroads. You take your guitar with you. You sit down. You play your best song. You know, you trim your fingernails back till they bleed. You play your best song, and the whole time you're sitting there wishing that, you know, wanting the devil to come, and eventually he would walk up.
A guitar player could go to a crossroads with a guitar and expect that the black man would take his guitar from him and tune it and give it back to him, and at that point in time, you'd be able to play. The person who owned the guitar would be able to play anything he wanted to play, but it would cost him his soul. People today may not know Robert Johnson by name, but if you mention, you know, he's the guy that sold his soul to the devil, they've all heard of that.
In reality, it's more likely that he developed his talent after spending time with guitarist Ike Zinnerman.
Ike took him under his wing and taught him how to play and how to make a cohesive unit out of the pieces of music that he was playing. And Ike's wife told me that they would sit up all night, some nights, knees to knees, in two chairs across from one another, playing guitar to one another and studying each other's manner of playing. And that's really how Robert Johnson became a professional musician.
Despite Robert Johnson's undisputed talent, Stephen Nevis says without the photos, Robert Johnson would have remained relatively unknown.
We believe the photographs are the reason that Columbia Records, which became Sony, issued and reissued the Robert Johnson music in the 2-CD set in 1990 and has since issued a number of others. We believe that without those photographs, that never would have happened because they added dimensions to the life of a musician who only had left recordings.
As Carrie Thompson's heir, Robert Harris thinks his grandmother was instrumental in helping turn Robert Johnson into a blues legend, even if most of his accolades happened after her death.
She didn't receive anything but very little money for what she did. There's been Grammys issued, awards issued. She got none of that.
But others see things a bit differently. Without Levier, there would be no Robert Johnson as we know the blues legend today.
Stephen Levier had spent countless years researching the man and the music and the myth, and was really in a great position to tell the story of Robert Johnson like no one had done before him. And so had he not done that and secured the copyrights to the music and the photographs, then the music and the photographs could have fallen into the public domain.
And if all had fallen into the public domain, then no one would have made any money. Luckily for some, that's not what happened.
Steve Levier and Sony earned millions from the 2-CD set. Carrie Thompson got $300. That was it. Nothing more, nor have her heirs seen another penny.
The photographs grace the front and back covers of the album jacket.
I feel like they thumbed their nose up at us, you know. and they've just gone on about their business and forgotten all about us.
But it is in 1992 that lawyer Jim Kitchens gives the Robert Johnson case the biggest shakeup yet.
He said, yeah, Robert Johnson was my daddy.
Blues icon Robert Johnson passes away in 1938. And for more than half a decade, it is believed that he died without any descendants, entitling his half-sister as the closest relative to his estate.
Under Mississippi law, Carrie Thompson, as the sole heir and the closest relative, would be entitled to the Robert Johnson estate. However, with a son or a spouse, the son or the child or spouse would be the heir over Carrie Thompson.
In 1991, the LaFleur County Chancery Court, in its search for legitimate heirs, deals a blow to Annie, Carrie's half-sister and legal heir.
What the court did was it removed Annie Anderson as the executor of the estate, saying she's an heir and therefore had a conflict of interest, although heirs are very often executors of estates.
Willis B. Brumfeld, Chancery Clerk of LaFleur County, is chosen to replace her.
And Brumfield, in turn, hired Stephen Levier as his agent, his expert, to help determine who the heirs were.
A petition is sent out calling on any potential heirs of Robert Johnson's to come forward.
There were a good many others who claimed to be some sort of cousin or some other kind of relative of Robert Johnson. People saw money and they started trying to get their hand in the pot.
After false heirs come out of the woodwork, in 1992, Mississippi lawyer Jim Kitchens comes forward with a bombshell. He announces that he has found Robert Johnson's illegitimate son, Claude Johnson. Hazelhurst, Mississippi, 1931. Robert Johnson has been on the road playing music since the death of his wife a year before. During a stop into Hazelhurst, he meets Virgie Smith, a girl who likes to go to parties from time to time.
My grandmother told me that Robert Johnson was her first boyfriend, her first love. And she was really, in love with him.
Robert also falls for the 17-year-old and allegedly asks her parents for permission to marry her, but they refuse. The two part ways.
Because her dad was a Southern Baptist preacher. And during those times, the blues was considered the devil's music.
December 16, 1931, Lincoln County, Mississippi. Virgie Smith gives birth to a baby boy. Claiming the baby is Robert's, she names him Claude Johnson. Claude is raised mostly by his Baptist grandfather, a sharecropper. Upon hearing news that he has a son, Robert visits Virgie.
Robert Johnson came the first time looking for Claude's mother. And Claude was out front, and his grandparents made him go inside. They knew who Robert Johnson was, knew him by sight, and they would not allow Claude to go out and see him or touch him. The Smiths were sincere in their religious convictions, and they did not want their daughter to have anything to do with anybody that played the blues. The next time he came, he knew that the mother was not there. So Claude knows that Robert Johnson came to the Smith home, to his grandparents' home, to see him, and that's very important to him. Again, the grandparents wouldn't let him talk to Robert Johnson.
A few years later, Claude's mother, Virgie, marries Marshall Pletchakane, and she moves away from home.
When Claude tried to live with his mother and his stepfather, the stepfather was very, very hard on him and treated him very differently from the way he treated his own children.
It's Claude's grandparents who reveal his true father's name, that he is none other than blues singer Robert Johnson.
Claude had been told by his grandparents, upon whom he totally relied, that Robert was his father, and this information developed before there was a penny to be had from the music of Robert Johnson. So there was no motive for him ever to fabricate anything about it.
My dad knew that he was Robert Johnson's son all along, but even my dad didn't know the significance of Robert Johnson and the name and who he really was, because, he was never in his life.
Years later, in 1989, Claude Johnson learns that the estate of Robert Johnson is looking for rightful heirs. Not sure what to do, Claude drops into the office of longtime friend and prominent trial attorney Jim Kitchens.
He was a little bit reticent, I think, to broach the subject with me, but he said, "Jim, do you know who Robert Johnson was?" And I said, "Sure, he was the father of the blues." So Claude said, "Well, that was my daddy." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, Robert Johnson was my daddy." And this hit me like a ton of bricks, because I knew how important Robert Johnson is to the music world.
Jim becomes his attorney, and before long, Claude is summoned to appear before the court.
I'm suspicious of Claude Johnson in just how the whole situation came about. He just pops up out of nowhere and saying that, "Hey, I'm Robert Johnson's son."
As Carrie's heir, Annie Anderson files a motion to dismiss Claude's claim, arguing that it is too little too late. Initially, the courts agree, but then it is decided that Claude can continue his heirship proceedings. Finally, in 1998, Claude is given the chance to argue his claim, and the trial begins. For Annie Anderson and Robert Harris, designated heirs by Robert's half-sister Carrie in her will, it is a shock to have a stranger on the scene, claiming to be Robert's son. To them, Claude is another charlatan trying to rob them of the family's legacy and Johnson's millions.
Being as close as my grandmother and my uncle were, Claude Johnson is somebody that we never heard about in the family.
When Annie and Harris's lawyer look into Claude's case, the thing that raises a red flag is Claude's name.
He identified himself when he got his Social Security card, and later, I believe, his driver's license, as Claude Kane. And in fact, Claude had lived for a better part of his life as Claude Kane, not as Claude Johnson.
As far as Claude's opponents are concerned, things just aren't adding up.
Claude explained he used the name Kane because Mr. Kane threatened him and was abusive to him, and what he implied but never said was that Mr. Kane did not want him to be using the name Johnson. We wondered about that because Claude only lived with Marshall Kane for 2 years. He spent most of his growing up life with his grandparents, the Smiths.
A month before Claude turns 21, he begins using his biological father's name.
And he went down to the courthouse and got a marriage license. And that is the first record that appears that was generated by Claude Johnson, in which he, in effect, forsook the Kane name and took the Johnson name, which was his legal name.
To prove Claude's claim, Jim Kitchens brings in a videotaped deposition from Eula May, who was not only Claude's mother Virgie's friend, but also her aunt, making her Claude Johnson's great aunt. Virgie Smith is just 17 when she goes to see Robert Johnson perform at a country dance hall in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. She's with her friends Eula May and Eula's boyfriend. At the end of his song, the four go for a walk.
They decided that they were going to leave the rest of the people and go out into the woods. And they went into the woods, and to hear Miss Eula May tell it, they did what came naturally.
Miss Eula May, she was very forthcoming. She was very erudite, and she was very graphic in her descriptions of the events that had resulted in the birth of Claude Johnson.
When she was asked during her deposition if they had sex, she said, well, we didn't know to call it that then, but that's what I understand people are calling it today, and that's what we did.
You're saying to me that you were watching them make love while you were making love. You don't think that's at all odd? Have you ever done that before? Or since? Watch other people make love?
Yes, I have done it before. Yes, I've done it after I married, yes.
You watched other people make love?
Yes, sir.
Other than Mr. Johnson and Virgie King?
Right.
Really?
You have?
No, really haven't.
I'm sorry for you.
But not everyone is convinced by Eula May's story. A DNA test is the next obvious solution to determine whether Claude is a legitimate heir to Robert Johnson's fortune.
It would prove once and for all, that he is who he claims to be. I think that's something that needs to be done. In my opinion, I think a lot of people would like to know, for sure.
But there's a hitch. No one knows for certain where Robert Johnson is buried.
There are 3 official grave sites of a man who died in 1938 and was placed into an unmarked grave.
So you go to digging up DNA back there, you don't know who you're gonna dig up.
Claude Johnson is determined to prove that he is blues icon Robert Johnson's flesh and blood, putting him in line to inherit millions of dollars of royalties. But there are obstacles in his way. The next obvious step is to do DNA testing.
So if you're trying to do DNA testing on Robert Johnson, where are you gonna find his body? That's a mystery in itself.
It's just an impossibility. There are 3, official grave sites for Robert Johnson. 3 official grave sites of a man who died in 1938 and was placed into an unmarked grave.
When I talked to Claude Johnson's lawyer, he said, it was probably a shallow grave and it's under an almond tree, and the almond tree roots have probably destroyed the remains. So even if he is there, it would be not productive to do it.
An alternative could be taking DNA samples from Carrie, Thompson and comparing them with Claude Johnson. But bodies are usually only exhumed for criminal cases.
So you go to digging up DNA back there, you don't know who you're gonna dig up.
What Claude Johnson does have going for him is a birth certificate from the state of Mississippi, listing his father's name, R.L. Johnson. Through Levier's research, he discovers that Robert Johnson went by none other than R.L. Johnson at the time when Claude was born, the same initials on Claude's birth certificate.
At that point, I said, yeah, he's bona fide. Nobody could make that up. And they'd have to know that R.L. was Robert Johnson.
But according to attorney Stephen Nevis, the birth certificate isn't valid.
Mississippi state regulations require that before the father of a child can be certified or put down on a birth certificate as being the father has to consent. The mother simply can't name anyone she chooses or someone she believes to be the father.
The alleged R.L. initials, and thus the paternity of Claude Johnson, could belong to someone else.
What we found interesting was that one of Robert Johnson's closest friends, who lived in Memphis, was known as R.L.
But this argument isn't enough to turn the case. In October 1998, in the face of all the evidence presented, Claude Johnson is declared to be the biological son and sole heir of Robert Johnson. This entitles him to an initial inheritance of more than $1.3 million.
That's basically, I'm not satisfied in my mind that he's, that he's a relative.
Not ready to give up what was left to them in Carrie Thompson's will, Robert Harris and Annie Anderson launch an appeal. On March 21, 2000, they also file a second lawsuit against Claude Johnson, along with music historian Steve Levier and Sony Music Entertainment Incorporated. Their complaint alleges fraud, misrepresentation, and breach of the 1974 contract Levier had signed with Johnson's half-sister Carrie, concerning the right to use photographs of Robert Johnson commercially in exchange for royalties.
The pictures belonged to my grandmother's estate and was never a part of the Robert Johnson estate. Without my grandmother's input, pictures, liner notes, there would be no Robert Johnson music collection. What we're looking for is compensation, of course, but mostly what we want is recognition.
Claude Johnson's lawyers don't agree.
The problem is that Annie Anderson, when she filed accountings on behalf of the estate, she identified the music, the name, the likeness of Robert Johnson. She also identified the two photographs of Robert Johnson as being assets of the estate. And that was all fine and good for Annie Anderson to do when she thought she was going to inherit the estate. But it wasn't until after Claude was determined the heir, to the exclusion of all others, Annie Anderson then came out and said, no, these weren't part of the estate. These were Carrie Thompson's assets.
A second lawsuit over the rights to the photographs still rages on. But Harris and Anderson lose their appeal, and Claude remains the rightful heir to Robert Johnson's fortune. In 2002, Claude Johnson is handed a six-figure check.
It's the greatest rags to riches story in the history of rags to riches stories. At the time that Mr. Claude was adjudicated the sole heir at law and the Supreme Court had ruled in his favor, there was about $1.5 million that had accumulated in the estate.
In addition to the new financial windfall, Robert Johnson's heritage honors Claude in another way. Prestigious Grammy Award for Lifetime Achievement. Eventually, Claude establishes the Robert Johnson Blues Foundation in his father's memory.
The foundation each year gives scholarships to people attending various music schools. We have different festivals throughout the year, and we have musical contests where we select someone who's under the age of 18 to be the Robert Johnson Award winner for that year, present them with a Gibson guitar, a Robert Johnson signature Gibson guitar.
Despite the battle for his royalties, Robert Johnson's music lives on. He is still a favorite among blues fans.
Robert Johnson is extraordinarily popular all over the world. Worldwide, Robert Johnson is just a blues icon, and he is seen as really the father of the Delta style of blues.
Johnson's music is so special because it's a culmination of all that came before, and it's the beginning of everything that came after. It's a watershed period of time when Robert Johnson created his music and recorded it. He was years ahead of his time.
For Robert Johnson's grandson, Stephen, the mystery surrounding his otherworldly talent and his death is just part of the legacy.
Basically because of the way he lived, the way he died, and the legacy that he was supposedly have left behind. There's gonna always be doubt, there's gonna be questions, but when you think about that, that keeps everything exciting about Robert Johnson.
James Brown, the godfather of soul, dies and leaves behind an incredible 50-year musical legacy.
There would be no Prince, there would be no Michael Jackson without what James Brown did on stage.
He's like lightning in a bottle. You know, he'd dance across the stage, lackady hairdos, the shiny shoes, just amazing talent. And I think one that anyone who saw him, he was a showstopper, you know?
But the entertainer leaves his family with next to nothing.
With his voice very elevated, Mr. Dallas, they are not gonna ride my back when I'm gone. Do you hear me?
It drives a stake into the Brown family, pitting his loved ones against one another.
In the late 90s, my grandfather was sued. Not by some record company, not by his trustees, but by his children.
Christmas Day 2006. Funk music superstar James Brown dies in an Atlanta hospital of congestive heart failure after a bout of pneumonia. He is 73 years old. Just 2 days earlier, James Brown is on his way to the hospital at the request of his dentist, who thinks he's too sick to undergo routine dental implant work. In the days before his death, Brown's son Daryl has urged him to slow down and take better care of himself.
You gotta get your health together, man. You gotta get yourself together. You know, you ain't no spring chicken, you know, and everything. And we talked for a long time. He said, "Thank you, son." He said, "Thank you for talking to me like that."
Brown's daughter Yama is in Atlanta, preparing to celebrate Christmas with her children.
My dad hated hospitals. He did not want to go. He fought tooth and nail about going.
Brown stays overnight for observation, but by December 24th, his condition is no better.
He was real sick, man. I could hear in his voice. He's very shortness of breath. And you can hear the ammonia. You can hear the breaking up real bad.
I called him the day before and I said, "Look, I'm coming to see you." And he's like, "No, don't come." And I said, "Well, tomorrow's Christmas." And I said, "So if you're still in the hospital, I'm coming to see you on Christmas."
Brown's wife, backup singer Tommy Ray Heine, is on the West Coast. She and her son James Jr. are on their way home to South Carolina to be with Brown for Christmas. She has no idea that time is running out. Albert Buddy Dallas is Brown's lawyer of 24 years and one of his closest advisors.
It was 1:20 in the morning, Christmas morning. I received a call from Mr. Charles Bobbitt. Mr. Bobbitt was a long-time road manager, personal assistant to Mr. Brown, was with Mr. Brown when he passed. And it was the voice of Mr. Bobbitt saying, simply, Mr. Dallas, he's gone.
And I just screamed. I couldn't even, what do you mean? I couldn't say anything. I couldn't believe it.
And it's like when JFK was killed, when Dr. King was shot, we all kind of remember where we were and what we were doing, and you know, this is the way it affected me and so many others.
I went from grieving literally for about maybe 15, 20 minutes to getting thrust into, now you gotta get everything together.
It's kind of like you'd like to be able to press the rewind button, you know, go back to a time that had not occurred, but that's not reality.
R.J. Smith covered Brown's life and music in his biography, The One.
It wasn't a Christmas anymore. It was a sad day. And I listened to a lot of his music that day.
He was the greatest, just like they say he was. You know, I mean, as a musician, I'm not saying it because I'm son, but I'm saying it because as a musician and what he's done for the music, what he's done for music, American music, rhythm and blues, soul, funk. He's the creator of funk.
Grandson William James Brown remembers the godfather of soul.
He's like lightning in a bottle. You know, he'd dance across the stage, lackady hairdos, the shiny shoes, just amazing talent. And I think one that anyone who saw him, he was a showstopper, you know?
While Brown's family and friends are in mourning, Albert Dallas steps into his role as trustee of his late client's estate.
I was named as trustee and personal representative along with two others, Judge Al Bradley, who was a magistrate judge there in Aiken, South Carolina, and who was road manager with Mr. Brown from 1991 until 2002. David Cannon was Mr. Brown's financial man in the organization.
Within hours, Cannon approaches Yama Brown about some of her father's business affairs.
He's like, well, we got this movie deal we gotta close. You know, your dad didn't get a chance to sign this. We've got some other things we're working on. We really need to get together and talk about how this is gonna go forward.
Immediately, she suspects that something's not right.
I said, no, what we really need to do is figure out his funeral. You're talking about business, and he hasn't even been dead 2 hours. It was ridiculous.
Brown's spouse, Tommy Ray, returns to the mansion, the home she shared with Brown for the past 10 years, and is shocked to find it off limits. Her strained relationship with Brown's adult children leads her to assume they are behind this.
We told her several times, we are not responsible. First of all, we're not the trustees. We don't have the ability to close the doors, lock the doors. We don't even have keys.
Brown's children aren't the only ones who are on the outs with Tommy Ray Heine.
And I secured it. I have no apology for securing it. In fact, had I not done that, I'm sure I would have been sued for not doing my job.
Dallas's decision apparently stems from a long-standing friction between Tommy Ray Heine and the three trustees, who question the very legitimacy of her relationship to the much older Brown.
There was a lot of controversy around her because she came so late in his life and there was so many years difference.
There are 36 years between the two.
When you met her, she was in Vegas. She was not exactly the type of woman that you would bring home to your mother.
January 2007, as tempers die down over the new year, Yama and Daryl and their 4 adult siblings, Terry, Larry, Venetia, and Deanna, gather for the reading of the will along with Tommy Ray, but they're all in for a shock.
He left to 6 named children my household personal effects.
The children are to receive nothing else.
There are certain things that he wouldn't do, and one thing he wouldn't do is ever cut his family out of things. And when I say that, I don't mean financially, and most people think that's what I mean. I'm talking about making decisions about his future.
Was I surprised when the reading of the will? No. No. Surprised by what? James Brown did what he wanted to do, man. Nobody make him do that.
Brown allocates a part of his estate to the Brown Family Education Trust for his grandchildren's educations. The rest go to Brown's pet charity, the I Feel Good Trust.
He then left a provision that says, everything else on the planet I leave to needy and underprivileged children to be educated in institutions in the states of Georgia, and South Carolina.
Everything else on the planet is Brown's house and the royalties from his music, estimated to be worth at least $20 million. According to Albert Dallas, Brown knew what he was doing when he first thought up the I Feel Good Trust for needy children in 1987.
I said, Mr. Brown, I'm just fascinated by your announcement of leaving everything to the I Feel Good Children's Trust, needy and underprivileged children. I said, it's just awesome that you plan to do this. But do you mind telling me what you plan to do for your children? In a cat-like manner. He literally came down right in front of me with his finger in my face, with his voice very elevated. Mr. Dallas, they are not gonna ride my back when I'm gone. Do you hear me?
Yama Brown denies her father would ever make such a statement.
He never made any indications like, I'm gonna cut you guys out of the will and I'm giving it to somebody else because I just don't love you.
The will also makes no provisions for Tommy Ray Heine or James Brown Jr.
Tommy Ray came forward. That was not a good time for everybody. You know, it was just like, I'm the wife. I get to say this, get to say that. And of course, the trustees are saying, you're not even in the will.
He did what he wanted. That was James Brown. He did it his way.
To leave out his wife, to leave out his child, I don't know.
The will sparks an immediate debate over Brown's last wishes. His grandson, William James, defends the will from the get-go.
A lot of needs have come about in this legal process since he's passed away. A lot of needs, I might say, that run contradictory to the needs of James Brown, who only had a need to educate children.
Giving hope to children comes naturally to Brown, who grew up without it on the main streets of Augusta, Georgia.
He lived in a neighborhood called the Terry. They called it the Terry because it stood for the Negro territory.
The only place they could stay was an aunt that he had. Honeybell, she ran a prostitution home.
He saw a lot of things at a really, really young age that I can't even imagine.
Learned to sing and dance for nickels, dimes, and quarters. I think he supplemented that income with the theft of some hubcaps along the way.
Before long, Brown has a setback that will really leave him singing the blues.
You could knock him down, but incredibly, he'd get back up again. It's just the mentality of James Brown.
James Brown's family is shocked to learn that the majority of the musician's estate will not go to them. Instead, it will go towards the education of needy children. James Joseph Brown is born into poverty on May 3, 1933, the son of farmer Joseph Brown and his wife Susie.
My grandfather was born in Barnwell, South Carolina, in the middle of a shack out in the middle of the woods.
You know, dirt poor, playing in the woods, making beats and sounds in the woods.
His mother, Susie, leaves young James and his father Joseph for another man when James is still a toddler.
Unfortunately, my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather had some issues that were not always the best of sorts.
The future soul superstar comes to see his mother's early departure as more of a betrayal than the regular beatings he endures from his father.
The only place they could stay was an aunt that he had. Honeybell, she ran a prostitution home. And for many years, my grandfather had to sleep in a prostitution bed. And of course, when the ladies needed work, he'd have to give up that bed.
So he saw a lot of things at a really, really young age that I can't even imagine. I have kids of my own, so I can't even imagine them growing up like that.
School takes a back seat to a more basic need, survival. Brown hits the streets of Augusta and earns his first few dollars as a performer.
Augusta was a big city, and Augusta was a tough city.
Learned to sing and dance for nickels, dimes, and quarters. I think he supplemented that income with the theft of some hubcaps along the way.
So there's not much you can do with a sixth grade education back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But the one thing he did have was talent. So he was, focused on, I've got a talent, I need to discipline myself to grow my talent.
His education was from the University of Hard Knocks and from Survival University.
It's this lack of education that leads Brown, decades later, to devise the I Feel Good Trust.
The intention of that trust was to educate children, young poor children. And he specifically didn't want color. He thought that we'd gone through that too many times for far too long.
and that what we really needed to do was focus on helping every child that's poor get an education, because that's the only way that you're going to get an education.
Brown doesn't have a team of advisors when he is arrested for stealing clothes at age 16. He quickly learns firsthand the difficulties of being a young black man incarcerated in the South.
Mr. Brown was always a survivor. You could knock him down, but incredibly, he'd get back up again. It's just the mentality of James Brown.
Here's a man who grows up from nothing in a prostitution home. And he goes from a prostitution home to the White House. And talent takes you there. Hard work takes you there. Every child can relate to that in this country, to start from nothing and become everything. He is what we teach every child to be every day.
You know, and there's something about music, man. I don't care how bad things are in your life. When you hit that note and you play that music, everything goes away.
In his third year of juvenile detention, while playing baseball against a local team, he meets civilian Bobby Bird. The two become fast friends. When Brown is released from prison in the early 1950s, Bird invites Brown to sing in his band, the Famous Flames. Gospel music will be Brown's salvation.
Bobby Bird was a very loyal sideman to James Brown throughout his career. A lot of people know him as the godfather of the Godfather, in a sense. He really looked after him and was really there from the start.
Brown has his first hit with the Famous Flames in 1955. Please, Please, Please sells over 1 million copies. Brown assimilates all of his musical influences and invents his own sound.
There's all these moving parts going in and out. There's a lot of tension created between the drums and the bass, how they're together and apart at the same time. It creates this sort of anticipation that makes us feel a certain energy, that makes us dance.
And of course, my grandfather being boisterous and someone who, was in your face a little bit. It wasn't long thereafter he was released that people knew this man can sing, James can sing. And he started singing with Bobby in the choir. And it wasn't too long after he started singing, he wanted to be up front.
And he was so at peace, it was just his comfort zone. He loved the stage. And I believe that's what kept him alive for so long.
He had a little pep in his step. He had style, he had charisma. He had that thing that makes you want to look at him and watch him do his thing on the stage.
As a physical performer, it's really tough to match James Brown. He was incredibly influential. There would be no Prince, there would be no Michael Jackson without what James Brown did on stage. I'm not even talking about music, I'm talking about the way this guy moved his body.
Brown's popularity eventually supersedes the other band members, and he becomes the main attraction. His 1962 recording of Night Train reaches Billboard's top 40, and his constant touring and several business ventures earn him several nicknames.
It's the godfather of soul, the hardest working man in show business, Butane James, the new minister of the super heavy funk. He was a big fella.
Brown appears in the 1964 concert movie The Tammy Show and upstages the headliners, the Rolling Stones.
If you had the privilege of going to a concert, you saw a man really give everything he had.
He was a born performer, and the thing that was amazing about him is he just exuded this tremendous amount of energy, but he kept it very tightly controlled on stage.
That control includes keeping a tight rein on his musicians as well.
You had to show up to the show looking proper, you had to be dressed properly, every detail had to be in its perfect place, and then he would just go on stage and explode out of these really tight sort of situations.
When you would see him spin around and point his finger at a member of the band, it just cost that band member $50 because he was slightly late or off-key.
Darrell Brown played lead guitar in his father's band for many years.
And he had the thing, where he flick his hands, and that's $5, $10, $15, $20, $25, $50. I got fined one time, man. It's funny, and he never took the money, but it was still a lesson, because I knew what I had did. I knew exactly what I did. I'm not telling, but I knew what I did, and it was like, and I was like, God.
I don't think I've ever seen anyone move their feet as fast as James Brown could move his. And he said, well, Miss Dallas, when you're out there on the Chitlin circuit and you're coming through Louisiana and the sheriff decides that he wants to see you dance and he starts firing bullets at your feet, he said, Miss Dallas, you can move them really, really fast.
As the civil rights movement gets underway, James Brown's music in many ways becomes the soundtrack for the struggle.
Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. That sort of became a rally cry. These are lyrics that became a rally cry for the Black Power movement and for black pride and black identity in general.
I think at that time he recognized who he was and what he had to offer in terms of the love, the ability to speak to his people, the ability to transcend, again, race and color and creed, to speak to the voice, the frustrations of a generation of people.
I will keep on going. I will, say what I need to say. It's gonna be unpopular, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I just feel like it's the right thing to do, and I feel like I need to pull up my people in the process and just make them feel proud of who they are.
The 1970s are a peak period for Brown, with hits like Get Up and Get Up Off of That Thing, but he's later knocked off the charts by the disco movement of the late 70s.
Disco was not about sweatiness and rawness. It was a little more glossy and a little smoother. It was about new stars, not old stars that we already knew.
By the early 1980s, Brown's fortune is nearly depleted.
It was tough for him because he wasn't kind of at the top like, he was before.
Now, on the verge of bankruptcy, the hardest working man in show business can't get a job. Enter lawyer Albert Buddy Dallas.
The banks really didn't want any of his business. He really was not a very popular figure in 1984. Mr. Brown and I developed quickly a personal friendship in addition to our professional relationship.
My grandfather was going through the IRS, coming in to try to take his possessions and his assets in a time when no one would deal with my grandfather. Banks, financial institutions. He was at the very bottom of his luck at this time. Buddy Dallas came in, took him on as a client, paid his bills up to a point where he could just get them back to zero.
They were impounding vehicles he owned and other things. I think he was in danger of losing a house he really loved on Beach Island in South Carolina. And Buddy Dallas bought the house for him and turned it over to James Brown.
It was kind of hard times. I mean, there was very little money, and many times I would have to cover expenses myself. But I did that in 1984 and 85 when we were trying to resurrect things. I was the only source of credit because Mr. Brown didn't have any.
With Dallas's help, Brown manages to turn things around and enjoys a resurgence with the hit single Living in America and several movie and TV appearances. But Brown's newfound popularity makes him a target for those wishing to profit from him. Some suspect that Tommy Ray Heine tried to take advantage of James Brown from day one.
Everybody figured she was a gold digger and she was after his money, and she could have been, she could have been after his money.
And then there's some shocking news.
The child produced through the supposed marriage could not have been his child.
Mr. Brown was totally humiliated by the developments with Miss Ray.
She refused to come see this man on his deathbed and decided rather to stay in Las Vegas and have her a good time.
Before his death, James Brown decides to leave much of the wealth he's accumulated over his 50-year career towards the education of needy boys and girls, leaving his children and spouse out in the cold. 1994, Tommy Ray Heine is 25 when she auditions to be a backup singer for Brown, who is 36 years her senior. Within 3 months, they are a couple.
I don't know what her initial intentions were, but I'm sure he afforded her a different lifestyle than she never had, so most people would have probably went for it. You have James Brown interested in you, and you're gonna go for it.
Tommy Ray gives birth to a boy in June of 2001. Brown is elated at the prospect of a half-black, half-white son and names him James Brown Jr. The couple are married later that year.
He fell in love with her. That's the woman he wanted to be with.
But on Christmas Day 2006, newly widowed Tommy Ray can't believe what is happening to her.
Why would you lock Tommy Ray out? Hell, Tommy Ray had been gone since October. She was not a resident of the mansion anymore. She had no right to be there after Mr. Brown left us.
Everybody figured she was a gold digger and she was after his money, and she could have been, she could have been after his money.
The trustees turned Tommy Ray away because they claim her marriage to Brown is not valid. The claim opens up a can of worms from Tommy Ray's past.
Tommy Ray claims to be the spouse of Mr. Brown. We all know that Miss Ray was married to another man at the time that she engaged in a ceremonial marriage to Mr. Brown.
Years before his death, Brown is shocked to learn that Tommy Ray is already married. In 1997, she had wed a Pakistani immigrant in an alleged green card fraud. The union is only annulled in 2004, long after the couple's 2001 wedding. Under South Carolina law, this renders her marriage to Brown null and void.
Mr. Brown was totally humiliated by the developments. Miss Ray sought an annulment. There were agreements between Miss Ray and Mr. Brown's counsel that she would never, ever seek to claim a common law relationship with Mr. Brown.
I think he tried to make her into the type of woman she ought to be. I just think he failed at it.
James Brown is free to remarry Tommy Ray Heine after her previous marriage is annulled, but he never does. And to many in Brown's circle, the marriage controversy is just the tip of the iceberg.
The child produced through the supposed marriage could not have been his child, for the simple fact we now know that my grandfather had many procedures done that would not have allowed him to have a child.
According to Albert Dallas, Tommy Ray Heine's son is born nearly 2 decades after Brown undergoes an irreversible vasectomy. Brown and Tommy Ray Heine are nowhere near each other during the 10 months prior to the birth of James Jr. To Dallas, it boils down to a simple question of geographical impossibility.
Mr. Brown's over on the East Coast and she's in Vegas or LA during that period of time.
Depending on who you talk to, DNA testing of James Brown Jr. is either kept private or it never happens at all. His paternity remains unresolved to this day. Meanwhile, a legal battle is brewing over the I Feel Good Trust, which ignores the interests of Brown's spouse and children in favor of children he doesn't even know.
When I look at his will, I think about, gosh, how did he ever, how could he have signed this without being properly advised?
Albert Dallas is quick to respond to this.
Anyone who could make such a statement as that obviously did not know Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown was a person that would influence you, but I absolutely assure you, you were not going to influence Mr. Brown.
Nobody's there pulling your damn arm. Okay, nobody's there telling you, no, don't put that there, don't do that.
When your lawyer tells you one thing, and that's your friend, you believe it. And he didn't look at all those contracts, he signed them.
Trust and estate lawyer James M. Kane shares his take on it.
I'm not suggesting James Brown didn't read his document, I don't know. But even clients who read the documents closely will not have the recall ability generally to tell you what all these various provisions are.
Dad never got higher than a 7th grade education, and he felt like that stifled him in the sense because he didn't know a lot of things about contracts.
But Brown did know a thing or two about Tommy Ray Heine, according to his grandson, William James.
The fact she refused to come see this man on his deathbed and decided rather to stay in Las Vegas and have her a good time, gave him all the knowledge about this woman he needed to know, such that in his last hours he would request of my father, don't let this woman come around, do not let this woman close to anything that makes James Brown who James Brown is.
Nevertheless, on February 1st, 2007, Tommy Ray files a petition asserting that she is Brown's rightful widow and has a 2001 marriage certificate to prove it.
Miss Ray has proceeded as if she was Mr. Brown's spouse. Mr. Brown never remarried Miss Ray, even in the face of numerous requests by Miss Ray that he remarry her.
She also claims that the August 2000 will used to determine the division of the estate is not the most current one, and that Brown often had the tendency to change it according to his temperament. Albert Dallas stands by his client's recognized will.
Mr. Brown's documents speak for themselves. Did he devise or not? And the answer is he did. Are we not then duty-bound, obligated to enforce his wishes in a court of law? I think we are.
The accusations continue to fly, and before long, allegations emerge that James Brown may have been duped by his closest advisors.
Within the course of 2.5 years, that money went from about $25 million down to zero.
While years before his death, Brown himself is named in a lawsuit filed by his own children.
Mr. Brown said to me, they don't know what that's cost them.
James Brown dies and makes little to no provisions for his family. While widow Tommy Ray Heine fights her own battles, children Yama and Deanna Brown suspect foul play on behalf of the estate's 3 trustees and decide to take matters into their own hands. January 2007, Albert Dallas and his fellow trustees are unable to present a complete portrait of Brown's financial status at the time of his death. To Yama Brown, it's just not good enough.
I don't know what else I could have done to have made everything transparent to the children.
On January 26th, less than 1 week after the reading of Brown's will, Yama and Deanna Brown's lawyer files an emergency petition for the termination of the estate's trustees.
We asked for their removal. That was one thing that we asked for after there was they couldn't account for certain things.
Dallas is shocked at the children's decision. He remembers Brown as someone who never mixed family with business.
One literally had to have an appointment to get in to see him, and that was true with the children. I mean, Mr. Brown was a very private man when he was not on the road. Fortunately, I was one of those that he allowed in that circle.
The children paint a complicated portrait of what it was like to grow up a Brown.
Picture your dad, okay, and then you having about 1 million brothers and sisters, you know, because we had to share them with the world. So picture that. Just imagine that way, and that was James Brown, the dad.
I could hug him, you know, nestle in his chest, just like any daughter would do their father. But there was always that flip side when you got to be around James Brown, the entertainer, and then you had to share him with the rest of the world.
He wasn't there very often. You know, he was out trying to hone his talent, trying to be James Brown, trying to travel the Chitlin circuit in the South as it was. And he was not allowed, really, to spend too much time with his family and be James Brown at the same time.
My mom would always have to explain to us, you know, Dad's working, you know, he'll be back and things like that.
Relations between Brown and his children are put to the test when he's arrested in 1988 following a high-speed drug-fueled car chase with the police. Brown is armed and is high on PCP, angel dust.
To me, it's amazing that he survived that car chase. So many police around him with shotguns, shooting out the tires of his car.
I don't know where they thought Mr. Brown would be going. I mean, everybody in the world knew who he was.
Brown serves just over 2 years in prison. His arrest causes a media frenzy.
As a child, it was difficult, and people don't really think about stuff like that. They don't think about how it affects his family, his wife, his kids, things like that.
No one knows exactly when he started smoking PCP. Some people say it might have been as early as the early 70s. A number of people say he smoked it on and off for the rest of his life.
We sometimes wonder, well, why do these artists and entertainers, you know, wind up with drugs or drug charges and so forth? Trying to stay up to give a performance and the grueling schedule they keep is probably the answer.
Him having a rough time with drugs, I always look at it as him having a rough time with himself, his demons. Okay, he was still human, man. He's just like anybody else, you know what I'm saying?
According to Yama Brown, her father's habit makes him susceptible to manipulation.
A lot of people took advantage of him during that time period because he was not thinking in his right mind and things like that.
Brown's last hit single, Living in America, drops in 1985. And by the time Brown is released from jail, money is tight again.
He had enormous amounts of debt from years on the road and traveling with, entourages of dozens upon dozens of people.
In 1999, Brown takes out a $25 million bond as an advance against future royalty revenue. The bond is set up by his accountant and future trustee, David Cannon.
Within the course of 2.5 years, that money went from about $25 million down to zero.
Brown is unaware that Cannon receives a check from the fund for $5 million during this period and buys property in Honduras. This sets off alarm bells for Yama Brown.
That happened while he was still alive, and he didn't know it because he trusted him to do the right thing with his nest egg. God knows what they're going to do when you're gone and you're not here to defend yourself.
David Cannon didn't deceive anybody, says Albert Dallas.
Let me tell you something. Mr. Brown could go ghetto on you pretty damn quick. And to suggest that someone took Mr. Brown's money, I would say to them, Mr. Brown didn't know to the penny what he had, but he damn sure knew to the dollar.
Yama Brown's lawyer will later use Cannon's alleged wrongdoings as an argument to have him removed as a trustee. Meanwhile, William James Brown has an allegation of his own, this one against his aunts, Yama and Deanna Brown.
In the late 90s, my grandfather was sued. Not by some record company, not by his trustees, but by his children. He was sued by his children for songs they claimed they wrote.
In the mid-1970s, Brown creates a publishing company in the name of his daughters, Yama and Deanna, to manage the rights of certain songs.
Because he put the songs in our names, obviously when we were very young, he wanted us to have something, to have something that was ours.
Not so, according to Brown's grandson.
My grandfather put these songs in their name to avoid taxes.
Deanna and Yama sought to recover those songs from Mr. Brown against his will, against his wishes, and brought litigation to collect royalties on those songs.
My sister and I, Deanna, sued Warner Chappell, and my dad was named in the suit because he was a performer on the songs that we sued about.
Yama also claims that Brown is on their side during the entire process. The lawsuit is settled in Yama and Deanna Brown's favor, but it leaves a sour taste in the mouths of many who claim that Brown was incensed at his daughter's betrayal.
That did more to influence James Brown, to put his values and his assets and everything he had inside this trust to educate children and not leave it to his family than any trustee could have ever done.
Mr. Brown said to me, they don't know what that's cost them.
January 2007. While Tommy Ray Heine fights to be recognized as Brown's rightful widow, his children wait to hear about their emergency petition to have Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alfred Bradley removed as trustees of the estate.
Mr. Brown's children wanted to become managers or trustees of the trust.
That's the thing about trustees, whether they would do a better job or whatever. That'd be like me, going into, say for example, walking on a job to drive a crane, and I've never driven a crane before.
Doing what the will and the trust directs. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Nothing pleased anybody. And the only person that should have been pleased was Mr. Brown. He directed it.
If he wanted you to run it, you'd have been running it.
Yama and Deanna Brown move forward and point to a clause in the I Feel Good Trust for Needy Children that allows the trustees to keep up to 50% of Brown's estate as administration fees. To them, an unheard of amount for a charitable trust.
We know most people are going to take up to 50%. If it allows them to, they're going to take it.
With the stage set for a three-way battle of wills over the estate of James Brown, differences within the Brown family lead to infighting. Brown's family is divided, with its members challenging each other's credibility.
If you lay cheese out, rats are eventually going to go get the cheese.
They wanted to paint this picture that we were lying, we just wanted more money, and that was it.
Grandson William James hits where it hurts.
There is no difference in hanging a black man from a tree in 1965 than there is hanging a black man in a courtroom in South Carolina in 2012.
James Brown's death leaves family members upset over how his estate is to be managed and divided. 2 separate petitions are filed in order to contest Brown's last will and testament. February 20th, 2007, as requested by Brown's daughters Yama and Deanna, the court replaces trustees Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alford Bradley with temporary trustees who will monitor the alleged wrongdoings. William James Brown can't believe it.
If he saw no right to get rid of these men at any time, who am I to pass judgment on them? Who am I to say they handled James Brown's business wrong if James Brown thought his business was being handled just fine? Who am I to offer an opinion about it?
I have only sought to carry out what Mr. Brown directed that I do. I didn't ask to be Mr. Brown's personal representative or trustee. I didn't ask for that job.
There are increasing tensions in the Brown family between those who oppose the will and those who accept it. William James and his father Terry stand by the will from the start.
Unlike the rest of my family, I don't want a dime from my grandfather. He's already given me everything I need. He's given me the tools to go out and compete in the world and make something of myself.
He took care of me, took care of my family. You know what I mean? What the hell can I say about the man because he didn't leave no money? It's his damn money. You know what I'm saying? And that's where the greed and all that craziness comes in, man.
For members of my family to try to perpetuate the idea that he was unduly influenced in some way, I think further shows how out of step, how out of touch, and how much they did not understand my grandfather.
The accusations put Yama Brown on the defensive.
They wanted to paint this picture that we were lying, we just wanted more money, and that was it.
It's just like if you lay cheese out, rats are eventually going to go get the cheese. That is to say, they all want to be something or have something that they're not entitled to, that they are not.
I mean, our family really thought about it and really talked about what our dad would have wanted. And what we know he would not have wanted was all this turmoil over his estate.
I don't know what my sister's after. You know, I can't speak for them. You know? I mean, if that's the case, if they're after something or whatever, I wish them luck. I hope they find it.
While Brown's 6 legitimate children are divided over the will, many others claim to be his illegitimate offspring.
Mr. Brown loved women. Let there be no doubt about that. And he never wanted for women.
The 1960s and 1970s are a time of free love, and that certainly proves true for James Brown.
He had wives, he had girlfriends, he had one-night stands, and he had people working for him who were sort of air traffic controllers who had to make sure that none of these bodies collided or ever met each other. It must have been a fearful job.
He was a player, man. He's James Brown, man. You know, what woman wouldn't want a man of power like that? You know, it ain't like he had to go out here and stand on the corner and wait. They came to him. Remember that.
But Brown's philandering will come back to haunt him. DNA tests prove that he fathers at least 3 illegitimate children over the years. As a result, Brown's illegitimate grandchildren will be eligible as beneficiaries of the Brown Family Education Trust. 2007, the temporary trustees hold an auction of Brown's belongings in order to cover legal fees and maintenance on his house. But this decision doesn't please everyone.
A lot of us were for it, but some of us were against it because some of the things that were sold were things that we did not agree on.
Unsatisfied by the current management of the estate, Brown's children decide to propose a settlement to the courts. They invite another key player in the battle against Brown's will to join them, Brown's widow Tommy Ray Heine, mother of James Brown Jr.
Their son was our family, that was like our brother, and he's a kid. He's the same age as my son. And so we felt an overwhelming sisterly, brotherly responsibility to make sure he was gonna be okay.
The settlement takes several months to prepare. It proposes to divide Brown's estate into 4 equal shares, one for his 6 adult children, and another for Tommy Ray Heine and James Brown Jr. The remaining 50% is to be split between the Brown Family Education and I Feel Good trusts.
Did Mr. Brown have the right to expect that his will and trust would be enforced by the court? Absolutely, as any other individual who makes a will and trust. They have the right to expect the courts to enforce it according to its terms.
The settlement is submitted to Judge Doyet A. Early in the Circuit Court of Aiken County, South Carolina in 2009. The settlement is approved on May 26, 2009. Dallas and his fellow trustees are shocked. Was justice truly served?
She, Tommy Ray, claimed to be the spouse, and now apparently is going to walk away with 25% of the total estate that has previously been entrusted to needy and underprivileged children, that I find to be absolutely unbelievable.
For William James Brown, the judge's decision is a slap in the face to his grandfather's original wishes.
I can say this much about it. There is no difference in hanging a black man from a tree in 1965 than there is hanging a black man in a courtroom in South Carolina in 2012.
How can there be any question about what Mr. Brown's intentions were? Read the document. It tells you unequivocally what he wanted. Why has the Attorney General of South Carolina turned its back on James Brown's wishes?
The decision represents a victory for Yama Brown. After all, half of Brown's estate is still being allocated to education.
We respected his wishes, and I still feel like we respect his wishes.
The 2 charitable trusts fall under the jurisdiction of the Attorney General of South Carolina.
They are there to make sure that that trust gets carried out. We asked for the judge to bring a party in that could help administer that. In other words, we as the family aren't even administering that. We won't even, quote unquote, touch that money. We'll help in the process determine who gets it and things like that.
As for the money itself, it's still tied up in legal red tape.
Do you know that not only has not one child received 1 penny to be educated, but 30+ lawyers have billed tens of millions of dollars in the face of those children not being educated?
5.5 years later, to my knowledge, not 1 dime. Isn't it ironic?
We couldn't do anything because we were tied up in this court, all this court stuff. So any monies that were coming in were going to more attorneys.
The underprivileged kids right now, those are the ones who are suffering. They suffering. They need educations, man. His grandchildren, their education ain't secure,
Mr. Attorney General, you have a fiduciary responsibility to help educate children. You have a responsibility to protect this trust. The legal courts in South Carolina, you have a responsibility to give a man due process, to give a man's will the respect it deserves.
In June 2007, Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alfred Bradley resign as trustees, or are forced to resign, according to Dallas, who points out what he sees as the bitter irony in all of this.
Whomever winds up doing all of this will be charging the same kind of fees that Mr. Brown provided for. And it was Mr. Brown's choice whom he wanted to carry out those duties. That's the thing that's so hurtful about all of this.
These were good men. They were decent men.
They were honest men. They were loyal. They did what Mr. Brown, my grandfather, asked them to do, without question, without fail, every single time.
I've often thought, wouldn't it be great if Mr. Brown could walk into the courtroom, would be held to pay. Be held to pay.
Darrell and William James Brown have already paid their price for trying to uphold the Godfather of Soul's final wishes.
Does it hurt that you've been ostracized by your family? Of course it does. Does it hurt on holidays you can't see your family? You can't pick up the phone and say, hey, I love you. You can't gather together. Sure, those things hurt.
You know, like any other siblings, man, you know, we have disagreements. You know what I mean? We don't agree with each other all the time. You know what I'm saying? And we would like to be closer, you know, at times.
But at the same time, I owe as much to my grandfather to do the right thing, to stand there, resolute and firm, to carry out his wishes, regardless of what the consequences are. Because in the end, without James Brown, there's no William Brown. Because he lived, I live. That's the bottom line to it.
It's a strain, man, you know what I mean? But the funny thing about it is that, you know, you put us all together, we all look alike.
It's a lot of work for my brothers and sisters and I to continue on, but it's worth it. You know, he came from nothing and built all of that. So the least I can do as his child is to continue it on in a positive way, in a way that would make him happy.
I love the man. He was my friend. He trusted me to see that his wishes were carried out, as I did for 24 years during his lifetime.
In the end, the music lives on.
James Brown, he's known as the Godfather of Soul, but he's really one of the most colossal figures in American pop music. I mean, this is a guy who really defined a sound, that sound being funk music, and its legacy just trickles on down through the decades.
Play Pass the Peas, play Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, play all that amazing music, play the funk. Just play it once, and it washes away all this other stuff.
Jimi Hendrix, considered by many to be the greatest guitar player in music history, is found dead at the age of 27. With no will to be found, the rights to his music and image are up for grabs.
It's the single most expensive estate battle in the history of rock and roll other than the Beatles.
A battle erupts that spans over 4 decades and leaves a family divided.
He starts yelling at her, calling her names, and I says, Leon, you gotta stop this stuff.
But when the stakes are worth an estimated $80 million, emotions can run high.
It was like a slap in the face. I wasn't angry, but I almost wanted some revenge.
Guitar legend Jimi Hendrix is found dead in a London hotel room.
Jimi dies in 1970 from mixing alcohol and sleeping pills. He had shacked up with a woman, a groupie type woman that he had just met, and she had sleeping pills that were in German, and they were much more powerful than American sleeping pills. Jimi, in all likelihood, thought the otherwise, thought they were weaker, and took a handful of them took what would have been about 30 times the recommended dose and happened to drink that down with a significant portion of red wine.
Emergency service workers find the superstar alone in his room. Jimi's management team calls his father Al in Seattle, Washington to break the news. Jimi Williams was Jimi Hendrix's best friend growing up in Seattle.
I got a phone call from my sister, and she's turned on the radio. You know, Jimi Hendrix just died in London or something. And I said, oh, no, you know, that's not true. And so I turned on the radio, and they were doing the announcement, and I says, I got to go over and see Al. So she said, I'll go with you. So I went over there, and Al was he was just broken.
Jimi's younger brother Leon has been behind bars at the Monroe Reformatory for just over 6 months. On the morning of September 18th, he's awoken with the bad news.
Everybody's got a radio. It said Jimi Hendrix dies of drug overdose. And then everybody said, turn that radio off. That's his brother upstairs. You know, so everybody turned their radios off. And then the chaplain came over the loudspeaker and said, Leon Hendrix, 415-617, report to the chaplain. And then that's when I knew that it was true.
There's a phone call for Leon.
My dad was on the phone. He said Jimi died, and you know, and we were both crying. But then the whole prison seemed to have this respect for some reason. When I came back, the whole prison was silent.
Leon is devastated.
They put me in solitary confinement because they thought that I might want to commit suicide.
For Leon, Jimi Hendrix was more than just an older brother.
Jimi was in charge of me. Anything that happened to him, I had to go. When he went to play, you know, band practice, he dragged me along.
Their relationship, it was special because it wasn't just a brother to Leon, he was like a father. And they kind of lived in an impoverished life, so it was kind of Leon and Jimi against the world.
I didn't know we were poor. You know what I'm talking about? There was no reason for me to ever think that, because I always had a sandwich or, you know, something, you know. And Jimi used to provide it for that.
Jimi and Leon's upbringing has been rife with struggle. Their parents, Al and Lucille, divorced in 1951.
My mom was, we didn't get to see her much because after my dad and her split up, he took custody of me and Jimi.
There was a lot of troubling things between Lucille and Al that I think Jimi, you know, hid, you know, from his friends and stuff.
An alcoholic with a gambling addiction, Al has difficulty paying the bills.
My father did the best he could with what he had. We would wake up early in the morning in the summertime, and he'd drag us out, and we'd go recycle cans and bottles and glass and copper wiring. Every now and then, he'd send us down with my little wagon, my little, you know, red Flyer wagon with a big 5-gallon diesel can from the Army, and we go get diesel. We bring it back to the house, and that was our heat for like 3 days.
Often, Al is forced to work nights, though there are other times when he just doesn't come home.
Well, Al was definitely a heavy drinker during Jimi's childhood. There were stories that neighbors told me of Al literally knocking, or not even knocking on the door, just walking in to a house, laying down and falling asleep on the sofa. Al thought that was his house when his house was a block away.
He went to work at 3 o'clock when me and Jimi got out of school. And he didn't come home until 12 or 1 o'clock at night. You know, so it was hard for him, but he did it. You know, I love that old guy. He's cool.
Social services receive tips from neighbors saying the boys are being left home alone.
The welfare people were trying to take me and Jimi from my father. Every day, they'd park outside and wait for us to come out and try to capture us. You know, and my dad said, "Don't answer the door," you know.
While they managed to avoid the social service agents for a while, Leon is eventually taken into foster care. Fortunately, he is not too far away.
Leon tells stories of often leaving the foster home he was at and going to find Jimi. There was definitely a very strong bond between these two boys.
But it's not the first time Al Hendrix's family is broken up. Back in 1948, Lucille and Al have a third child, Joe, who was born with health issues that include a club foot, a cleft palate, and one leg shorter than the other.
He was born with a number of birth defects, and they raised him, they loved him, and they seemed to be doing relatively well with his upbringing. He would go a couple times a week to this place called Children's Hospital in Seattle for therapy.
After Joe, a daughter, Kathy, is born blind, while another daughter, Pamela, and a son, Albert, have minor health issues. They all become wards of the state and are put into foster care. For 3 years, Lucille and Al try to keep Joe, but the financial strain is too great.
That's the part that's heartbreaking, is that Joe had been around for a while. Joe is old enough to have had memories of it.
Some say that for Al and Lucille's relationship, it's the straw that broke the camel's back.
There got to be a point, though, where Al Hendrix thought it was too much. It was one of the biggest points between Al and Lucille. Lucille wanted Joe to stay with them. Al wanted Joe to be given away to the state for foster care. And eventually Al won that argument. They dropped Joe off at the hospital.
Though divorced, Al and Lucille maintain an on-again, off-again relationship. When she dies in 1958, it hits the family hard.
You know, one of the most heartbreaking story of Jimi's childhood is that his mother dies when Jimi's just a young teenager, when he's 15 years old. And she died of cirrhosis of the liver in all likelihood. Her spleen ruptured.
My dad said that Mom had passed and we're gonna go to the funeral, but then he had got so drunk that he missed the funeral by like 8 hours. You know, we went to the funeral home and they said, oh, that was at 2 o'clock. And we went there at 8, you know, at night. And so Jimi was pretty upset about that.
Jimi becomes introspective and turns to music. He idolizes Elvis Presley, Elmore James, and Little Richard, and practices playing guitar, first on a broom, then on other stand-ins.
First guitar was actually a ukulele. And he was, you know, he played Peter Gunn on it. Dun, 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 dun. And then he would tune it up to get to the next key, and he played over and over again. Dun, 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 and then he tuned it up. Dun, 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 dun. You know, that's how he started playing guitar.
Soon after, Jimi finds a used guitar he likes for $5, but initially his father refuses to buy it for him.
He said, no, I'm not giving you $5 for a guitar. Are you crazy? You need to work with your hands. Jimi, actually, we were having dinner at our auntie's house, and Jimi said, Aunt Ernestine, there's a guitar for $5, but my dad won't buy it. And my aunt went crazy over my dad, slapped him. He said, if you don't buy that guitar, I buy it.
When you see the skill that he showed when the world discovered Jimi at 21, it appears that Jimi at that point had been playing for decades. And the truth was he'd only been playing for a few years on very, very crude instruments.
The guitar is an obsession for Jimi.
Some point, Jimi was showing up with his guitar strapped to his back, neck, you know, downward, and didn't have an amplifier, but he went around and played, you know, for anybody who would ask him to play. And that guitar went every place with him. I mean, he played it constantly.
Seattle, Washington, 1967. Leon is working in his father's landscaping business. For 5 years, Jimi has been chasing his dream of becoming a professional musician. Preoccupied with life on the road, Jimi hasn't communicated much with his father and brother. One day, during a lunch break, Al and Leon hear loud music coming from a neighbor's apartment.
These people downstairs are playing this loud rock and roll music all the time. And for some reason, my dad said, you know, that sounds like Jimi.
Leon discovers they are listening to a record by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It's the first time Leon's seen the album, and he takes the record over to show his father. They're floored.
It's like, wow.
Just a year earlier, Jimi was playing $6 gigs at small clubs in Greenwich Village.
It was very different for an African American to suddenly be in white people's land, in folk music land, But Jimi began playing some of the exact same songs he'd played in Harlem, but they played very differently in the Village. They were exotic. Jimi combined that with playing the guitar with his teeth, playing behind his head, playing with one hand. Those things to a white audience in the Village seemed extraordinary.
He is soon discovered by Animal's bassist turned music producer Chaz Chandler.
One day at a club in the Village called the Cafe Wah, Chaz Chandler, who had been the bass player in the band The Animals, and saw Jimi doing that. Chaz infamously spilled a milkshake on himself. He was so impressed by what Jimi was doing.
Chaz becomes Jimi's manager and takes him to England.
Jimi packed up one suitcase, that was all he owned, got on a plane and flew to London in 1966. Within 10 days of arriving in London, he was a star. It truly is one of the most extraordinary rise to fame in music history ever.
He forms a band, the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
His career took off like a snowball at that point. It went just out of control.
Hendrix went to London to launch his career. He kind of did this reverse British invasion thing where he went overseas to get things started and then came back to America as a rock and roll hero. This is a guy who defined the psychedelic era and did a tremendous amount of groundbreaking work in a very, very short amount of time.
In less than 2 years, the Jimi Hendrix Experience is looking for their big break in North America. After landing gigs at Monterey International Pop Festival and Woodstock, and with 2 more albums under their belt, the band's popularity explodes. But during the hippie movement of love, psychedelic music went almost hand in hand with a psychedelic lifestyle.
Drugs really only came into his life once fame happened and once money happened.
This lifestyle, along with an almost obsessive work ethic and non-stop touring schedule, eventually catches up with Jimi.
As he got more famous, he became more unhappy because the demands were different than going to the Cafe Wah on Friday night. That began this downward spiral thing. They booked Jimi like 2 gigs a day in Europe. So it was like killing him by attrition, by wearing him out.
He clearly did eventually develop a bit of a problem with drugs towards the last year of his life. And in some ways that did lead to the lifestyle choices that eventually led to his death in 1970.
Many believe when he took the handful of sleeping pills the night he died, he was just trying to get a good night's sleep.
The alcohol that he drank and the alcohol already in his body eventually led to his death. He did not overdose intentionally. It was not an overdose from, let me take a bunch of stuff and feel really great. It was, I'm exhausted, I need to sleep, I'm taking a ton of these sleeping pills, and I'm gonna drink it down with red wine, and he died.
Jimi doesn't leave a will. Jimi's father Al is considered his next of kin and is in line to inherit the rights to his son's musical legacy, until a paternity suit threatens to take everything away.
If you look at a photograph of this child and you look at a photograph of Jimi Hendrix, even though his mother was a blonde Nordic woman, you go, this is clearly Jimi Hendrix's child.
Guitar superstar Jimi Hendrix dies without a will suddenly at the age of 27. Everyone assumes his father Al will inherit his son's estate, but his claim is about to be challenged.
Jimi had at least 2 children that we know of. One of them was a woman with a woman named Diana Carpenter, who he had met in New York. She had been a prostitute during that era, and Jimi hooked up with her.
Harlem, New York, 1966. Jimi and Diana Carpenter are living together when Diana discovers she is pregnant. At Jimi's insistence, she stops working the streets for a while, but it's not long before she starts up again. She soon gets arrested, and the 2 part ways. Diana's daughter Tamika is born in February 1967. Nearly 4 decades later, Jimi's childhood friend Jimmy Williams runs into Diana in Seattle in 2004.
I just happened to meet a woman by the name of Diane Carpenter, and she said that she was Jimi's ex-girlfriend. She had a daughter by Jimi. And I said, oh, wow.
Her lawyers launch a paternity suit in 1970, before Jimi's death. They send letters instructing him to do a blood test, but it never happens. A year before he dies, Diana tracks Jimi down after one of his concerts.
She clearly approached Jimmy at one point in San Francisco and Berkeley and told him, "I've had a kid by you." And Jimmy hung out with her, at least in the airport.
It will be their last encounter. Jimmy never officially recognizes Tamika as his, though he does carry a photo of her, and in the unreleased song Red Velvet Room, he sings a line, "How's Tammy?" After Jimmy's death, Diana challenges Al's claim to Jimmy's estate.
She says, well, I'm here with my daughter to put a claim in for some of the estate.
Whenever there is no will present, estates go to the next of kin. But her case isn't convincing enough, and in 1972, the courts rule against Diana's claim, saying that because no blood test was taken while Jimmy was alive, paternity cannot be established.
That child's DNA has never been tested against Jimmy, and so we're only taking Diana Carpenter's word for that.
If Jimmy is her dad, it's got to be the worst feeling in the world that you can't get your family to acknowledge that you're, his kid.
This leaves Al with the rights to the entirety of his son's estate. Not knowing much about the music biz, though, he hires attorney Leo Branton and producer Alan Douglas to manage his son's legacy.
Shortly after Jimmy died, and this is as I understand from the court records, I wasn't an attorney on it, Leo Branton basically sent something to Al that said, sign here and I'll take care of everything.
My relationship with Al Hendrix was a very warm relationship. He trusted me completely. He was very responsive to whatever advice I would give him. He always indicated that he appreciated what I was doing for him.
Leo soon discovers that Jimmy was in debt.
I found out that he had about $20,000, and he had loads of debt. He owed his manager over $300,000. He owed money to Warner Brothers that they gave him as a loan to build a studio.
He would finish a concert and go out to a club and jam all hours of the night. But all the business dealings he didn't care about, and he frankly was very bad at. He was a very popular performer. He made more money at Woodstock than anyone else, and yet a week later he played for free on a Harlem street, and that cost him money. He made decisions that were primarily based on his desire to play music, not on what was smart business sense.
In short, Jimmy doesn't leave much, but he does leave an extensive song catalog and hundreds of hours of unreleased recordings.
Alan and I went all over the world trying to find pieces that Jimmy had done and had never been made into a record and had never been produced or distributed. And from this, we made 6 post-death albums. It generated millions of dollars for him.
Leo Branton then went on to manage the estate while paying some royalties to Al Hendrix.
Along with occasional lump sums, Al receives around $75,000 a year in royalties, and to him it's more money than he's ever seen in his lifetime.
He was giving half of that to me, and I didn't know. I thought he was making way more money than that, but he'd never told me that.
Al is just happy to be able to provide for his family for the first time. Seattle, 1966. 8 years after the death of his first wife, Al Hendrix meets Ayako June Jinka, a mother of 5, including a daughter named Janie. They marry soon after. Jimmy never lives with them and only meets his stepfamily a couple of times.
That woman had a couple of children of her own, including one young girl who lived with her at that point, who would have been about 7 at that time in 1967, and that was Janie Hendrix. Al eventually marries the mother and adopts Janie Hendrix. So Janie Hendrix is not related to Jimi Hendrix by blood. She is his adopted stepsister.
Leon is living off and on with his father still, and he sometimes looks after his new sister.
My relationship with Janie was a big brother to little sister relationship. I took her to the bus stop to go to school. I picked her up. You know, I babysitted her, read her the Bible, did all the things that big brothers should do for a little kid.
Content with his family and his royalties, Al thinks all the dust has settled. But in the early 70s, another woman comes forward claiming to have Jimi's love child.
Jimi had many girlfriends, was very free with sexuality. He was not worried about birth control in that era, and may have several other children that we don't know that have never come forward.
When Jimi plays concerts in Stockholm, Sweden, he has flings with Eva Sundquist between the years of 1967 and 1969. She claims that she became pregnant with their son, James Daniel Sundquist, in 1969. A few years later, Eva launches a paternity case in Swedish court. Leo Branton, Al's lawyer, tells the Swedish courts that the claim is baseless.
I researched the law and found out that in the United States, one could not bring a paternity cause of action after the death of the alleged father. It must be brought during his lifetime. And the reason for this is there is no way for the alleged father to contest the claim because he's no longer around.
Nevertheless, in 1975, the Swedish courts side with Sundquist and declare her son to be Jimi's rightful heir.
So I rejected the claim because I knew that there was no way she could ever collect on this in the United States.
Childhood friend Jimi Williams is surprised to hear about the case.
I picked up a paper one day and I saw this picture of this kid in LA that was suing the Jimi Hendrix estate because he was Jimi's son. The attorney for the kid, he was just looking for any way to try to get somebody to recognize his claim.
If you look at a photograph of this child and you look at a photograph of Jimi Hendrix, even though his mother was a blonde Nordic woman, you go, this is clearly Jimi Hendrix's child.
Jimi Williams, who's become good friends with Jimi's dad, Al, is upset that he has denounced James' claim. He confronts Al.
Went in and I says, Al, is this your grandson? Probably. And I said, well, what percentage do you think that that's your grandson? And he said, oh, probably 150%. So he just trapped himself with me right there. And I said, so you are denying this kid, you know, and you got all of these other people part of the estate and you're denying him? And I said, you know, I've been your friend since I was 8 years old. But this friendship's gonna be ended if you don't do something for that kid. And I walked out.
In 1978, Al appears to settle things with Sundquist.
He showed up at one of our favorite drinking halls and he beckoned me over to the table and I said, yeah, what's up? And he said, Jimi, I want to let you know I gave the kid $1 million. And I said, that's the old Al that I know, you know.
If these children really are the children of Jimi Hendrix, it seems like they should publicly be acknowledged as that. And as far as I know, neither Tamika nor James Sundquist has ever gotten that kind of public acknowledgement from Jimi's estate or heirs.
By 1997, with both paternity suits finally handled, things once again appear to have settled down when a letter arrives, offering Jimi's siblings Leon and Jimi Hendrix $1 million each, and changes everything.
You find a lot of people influencing Leon and explaining things in ways to him that he might not be able to understand. He's being scammed, essentially.
Certain people claimed that I was robbing the estate, which was a lie.
After inheriting his rock star son Jimi Hendrix's estate, Al Hendrix hands off the management reins to his lawyer Leo Branton. Leo has licensed out the rights to Jimi's music, entitling Al to royalties, but the contract is about to expire. In 1991, Leo and Janie, Jimi's younger siblings, receive a letter from Leo Branton that will change both of their lives.
The reason for the offer from Leo Branton was because the copyrights were coming up and the law was that the next of kin would have to sign off on it in order for him to renew the copyrights for himself.
There is a quirk in the law concerning musical compositions that when Mr. Hendrix, who got all of the income from these things, when he died, the income would go to his children. And Al wanted to be able to control those things, and so I conceived of the idea of his buying out the children's rights.
The letter offers Leo and Janie $1 million each to sign away their rights as inheritors to Jimi's works.
And I told them that before I have them sign off on this $1 million sum, they had the opportunity of going and consulting with their own lawyer and to see whether or not it was a deal that they should take.
While he is now in his early 40s, Leon doesn't have a steady job and his income is unstable. Lured by the instant riches, as well as wanting to set up trust funds for his own children, Leon blindly signs on the dotted line.
I said, I need 10% of it now. You know, and they gave me $100,000.
You find a lot of people influencing Leon and explaining things in ways to him that would, at Leon's age, that he might not be able to understand he's being scammed, essentially.
Janie, however, does hire a lawyer. Her lawyer claims that Branton is giving the Hendrixes a raw deal by feeding them misinformation on how much Jimi's music is actually worth.
Certain people claimed that I was robbing the estate, which was a lie. They claimed that Al was getting nothing but $75,000 a year. It's true that he was only getting $75,000 a year, but that's because of the fact that Al said that's all he wanted to live off of, and the rest of it would be generated and saved in his trust.
He said, I trust Leo Branton, and I said, but Dad, every day in the news I see Jimi sold like $10 million worth of records this year. And he said, well, I don't know about all those kind of details. I just know that, you know, I trust Leo Branton and think he's doing a good job.
I made him a multimillionaire. If I hadn't come into the picture, we don't know whether he would ever earned the kind of money that I was able to generate for him. I'm not sure that other lawyers would have been able to get rid of all of the debts like I did.
Janie relays this information to her father, Al, and convinces him that they should go after Leo and Alan to win back the rights to Jimi's music. It's the beginning of a partnership that will later shut Leon out.
They lived together. You know, she lived in his house, you know, and I lived way across town.
With Janie's help, Al severs ties with Leo and hires a new lawyer in 1993. He files a lawsuit against Leo Branton, producer Alan Douglas, and 2 distribution companies.
The next thing I know, I am served with a complaint charging me with fraud, theft, unfair dealing, and along with a letter that this lawyer now represented Al Hendrix, and under no circumstances was I to communicate with Al Hendrix in any way.
Al and the family decided in the 90s that they'd kind of had enough, felt Jimi's legacy wasn't being well dealt with, he wasn't being preserved. It just wasn't a fair deal in the first place and definitely wasn't being managed as a fair deal.
They go back and forth with lawyers until 1995, but the case doesn't go to trial.
My father won all the music rights to the Jimi Hendrix estate back to him by claiming incompetence. He didn't know what he was signing. There's no reason for him to give away, you know, $25 million a year for his little $75,000 a year salary.
Al's team eventually settles with the 2 distribution companies, giving him back control over the rights to license Jimi's music. With this new power, Janie and Al create a new company whose sole purpose will be to manage Jimi's legacy.
And they formed Experience Hendrix, Authentic Hendrix, and that's when Jimi Hendrix came to come start working on the estate.
They make a deal to authorize Jimi's music to MCA for $40 million. Despite being able to live even more comfortably, Al continues working for his landscaping business and appoints Janie, whom he now trusts deeply, as Experience Hendrix president. Leon is given a chance to step in, but he's not interested.
My dad said I didn't have to work there because I was doing my own thing. I was doing my art, had my own nice little job place, and stuff like that.
Al Hendrix tells Leon that he has established a trust for him, entitling him to 25% of the estate. By this time, Leon has divorced his first wife and is the father of 6 kids. He is grateful.
And my dad always told me, he said, don't worry about anything, Leon. I take care of your whole thing, your whole family and everything. You got trust fund and everything's fine. So I said, okay, cool.
Around this time, Al starts having some problems with congestive heart failure. Janie is awarded power of attorney, and Al gets moved back and forth between his home and an assisted living facility. Leon isn't happy about it.
I had to go take him out of the hospital, put him in a private facility, and he came back to life. And when I come and visit, he goes, turn that channel, rub my feet, you know, scratch my back, He was back to life.
But a few years later, on April 17, 2002, Al dies in his sleep at his home in Seattle. At the time, Leon is in LA and he flies home for the funeral, but tensions are growing between him and his stepsister.
For one thing, all the seats were taken up by her family, and so I was upset with that, so I said, hey, you guys got move back, come on. We're here for the funeral. And then when the military came up and gave her the flag, that should have went to me as a son, and I'm also a military man, and that kind of hurt me.
Leon got emotional when, they read the sermon at the site, and Janie wasn't too far away, and he starts yelling at her, calling her names, and I says, Leon, you gotta stop this stuff, and so I grabbed him and pushed him, and everybody was saying, Leon, don't do this, you're disrespecting your dad's funeral.
Things become even more heated when Al's will is read the next morning and Leon isn't even invited. He doesn't know that he's about to be completely disinherited.
I just got a letter to my attorney from their attorney saying, here's your inheritance. And that was it. 1 gold record. It was like a slap in the face.
Al Hendrix, father of guitar legend Jimi Hendrix and heir to his estate, dies in 2002. His younger son Leon is immediately suspicious after he isn't invited to the reading of his father's will. Leon's lawyer gains access to the will after a few days and tells him to come over to collect his inheritance, a single gold record of Jimi's. As shocking as it seems, tension has been building between his stepsister Janie and Leon for some time. 1996, Seattle, Washington. Leon is living a hustler's life, one he's led since he was a teenager.
Leon, it's probably safe to say, was somewhat the black sheep of the Hendrix family.
I was like a street kid, and the only relief I ever got from that is when Jimmy came home and took me on tour with him. Otherwise, I was back on the streets, doing my hustle, doing the thing. Selling weed and, messing around, getting in trouble.
He also has a debilitating crack habit and smokes it every day. Al attempts to step in to make his son go get treatment, but Leon is unable to control his addictions.
I had some problems with addiction, alcoholism, cocaine addiction, and I had a problem with that. I didn't think I had a problem. But evidently my kids did because they intervened and got me sent to a treatment center run by musicians.
He eventually completes a 2-month stint in rehab at the Impact Drug and Alcohol Treatment Center in the late 1990s. After his release, he's close to once again falling off the wagon until he meets Jasmine Rogue.
She actually is a drug counselor. So putting him with her in a good element actually keeps him on a day-to-day basis, sober.
We're still together, so I appreciate her. It's all because of her that I'm successful today.
Despite getting his life back on track, Leon was still left out of the last will Al signed in 1998. Cheney's legal team maintains that Al cut Leon out of the will because of his lifestyle.
I just got a letter to my attorney from their attorney saying, here's your inheritance. And that was it. 1 gold record. And it wasn't even an original one. It was just a copy that she took off her wall to give to me. So it was like a slap in the face. I wasn't angry, but I almost wanted some revenge.
Leon had a bad record. Leon had a record of drugs. He surrounded himself with irresponsible people, and Janie's defense team argued that he would go for the fast buck and get rid of the estate rather than let it grow.
His lawyer explains that Leon appeared in all his dad's wills except for the last one, which Al revised in 1998.
My dad wrote several wills, and every one of them I was named as the only beneficiary.
Al's will gives the bulk of the estate, estimated to be worth $80 million, to someone else who's been waiting in the wings.
When Al Hendrix died in 2002, he left the bulk of his estate to Jimi Hendrix, the daughter that he had adopted from his second marriage, who was not related to Jimi Hendrix by blood.
After he died, I was cut out of the will. And the whole Hendrix family, in fact.
Leon doesn't have enough funds to sue for his right to inheritance alone, but real estate developer and friend Craig Diefenbach offers to help.
When I was left out of the will, I was really upset at first. But then I had some crazy people that decided to spend millions of dollars on suing my sister.
In August 2002, they file a lawsuit contesting the validity of Al's will.
What Leon was trying to show was an undue influence and why there was a codicil signed in Al's will, basically cutting him out of his inheritance. And his position was that it was Janie and that Janie didn't want him to have anything.
There's no way in the world my father would have cut his whole grandkids out of the Jimi Hendrix estate.
Leon had a great case going in. Al made a lot of efforts to take care of Leon all through his life, so it becomes questionable to me why he would at the end.
At the same time, Leon launches a second lawsuit joined by other family members, claiming that Janie and Vice President Bobby Hendrix have grossly mishandled Experience Hendrix's finances. They want Janie removed as trustee. The case goes to trial in June of 2004. Leon's defense team alleged that Janie has spent $1.7 million on her corporate credit card, taking out no-interest loans from the trust fund to buy herself cars, $3 million to produce 3 of her husband's gospel albums, and has failed to distribute any funds to other listed beneficiaries.
With respect to the money she gets as a beneficiary, she can do absolutely anything that she wants with it. She can do my gospel album, your gospel album. She's entitled to do it. It's her money.
Janie's legal team fights back, saying that the past lawsuit against Leo Branton and the current case against Leon have drained the trust of their funds. They also argue that Al's will is valid and that they have proof.
There was a videotape in this case, and the videotape shows the signing of the will. And there's a dialogue going on between Al and other people on the videotape. And what the videotape shows is that he understood what he was doing.
I specifically asked her, why don't you just simply settle with Leon? Why don't you, find some way? Wouldn't that be much more inexpensive and an easier way out of this? And she claimed that what she was doing was following Al's wishes, and she had a duty to do that. Al clearly thought Janie had the best head for business and had a very close relationship with her, and he wanted to reward her, presumably, for the work that she had done to help him get the estate back.
There's a very high failure rate in this business. She's in a place where very, very sophisticated businessmen in the music world have gone under. I think she's done a good job. Al lived with Janie, Al lived with Leon, he had lived with Jimi Hendrix. He knew the situation, he made a decision. It's a decision that seems absolutely correct.
In an even bigger twist, during the 7-week trial, the issue gets raised whether Leon is actually Al's biological son. In court, Janie's legal team state that in Al's 1999 autobiography, he wrote that Jimi was his only son.
I was quite shocked when I heard later that Al had, in his will, left nothing to Leon and claimed that Leon was not his son.
He also writes that Lucille had a history of sleeping around.
His mom was very young. She was someone who liked to go out.
In 1942, Lucille is barely 17 years old when she marries Al and is pregnant with Jimi. Al gets drafted into the Army less than a week into the marriage, and instead of playing the good wife at home, she passes Jimi off to other friends and family. When Al returns home from the war in 1945, he has to travel to California to claim his son.
Jimi was born Johnny Allen Hendrix on the birth certificate. And when my dad came home from the war 5 years later, he goes and gets him from California and brings him to Seattle, and he says, "I'm changing your name." And he goes, "Why? I'm little Johnny. Everybody's calling me Johnny for 5 years." You know, he said, "Well, that's the name of your mother's boyfriend."
He and Lucille reunite soon after, though Lucille is still unable to settle down. In 1947, she becomes pregnant again, this time with Leon.
In many ways, she was very ill-prepared to be a mom.
I remember, like on my 5th birthday party, you know, she threw a big party for me. And all the neighbor kids came and stuff like that. And she brought her boyfriend that upset my dad.
Despite being uncertain if he's the father, when Leon is born, Al is thrilled.
Leon and his dad over the years had a good relationship. It was a dysfunctional relationship, but nonetheless, they were very loving and cared about each other a lot.
But during the 2004 trial, just 5 years later, Leon is ordered to undergo a DNA test.
Jenny had me DNA tested to prove that Al Hendrix was not my father.
Meanwhile, Janie's legal team is ready to present the findings from Leon's DNA test. It doesn't match.
It didn't surprise me when it came back that he wasn't my father, but he was my father. Me and my dad knew this all our lives. You know, I said, "Dad, how come I got straight hair?" He goes, "Well, you got your mama's hair. I don't want to hear nothing." I go, "Well, Dad," he said, "Listen, I'm your dad, you know, and I'm the only dad you know. Forget about it. I don't want to hear no more about it." So I never brought it up again because he was my dad. I love him, you know. He loved me. He was my father, you know.
The court threw that out because Al accepted Leon as his son, so it didn't matter what the DNA said.
But there's another bomb about to drop. Someone else comes forward to claim his rightful spot in the Jimi Hendrix legacy.
I remember walking in a courtroom and I saw this kid that I said, "God, that's a clone of Al's."
Leon Hendrix and his adopted sister Janie are fighting over their brother's guitar legend Jimi Hendrix's estate. In the midst of all this legal drama, a new heir suddenly comes forward saying that he too should have a piece of what is rightfully his. Joe Hendrix, whose custody was taken over by the state in 1952, enters the courtroom, asking to be included in his father's estate.
He came out of nowhere to make himself part of the legacy.
Most of the Hendrix family has not seen Joe for decades, after Al and Lucille gave him up when they could no longer afford to pay for his health care.
I remember walking in a courtroom and I saw this kid that I said, "God, that's a clone of Al's." And they said, "That's Joe Hendrix, that's Al's son." I said, "How's that possible? I never knew this kid." They said, "Well, he adopted him out."
Like Leon, the court orders Joe to take a DNA test. Many are shocked by the result.
She did a DNA test on Joe, and it came back that he was not Al's son.
Whatever manifestation of the DNA that came up when Joe Hendrix was born, he is clearly Al Hendrix's child, in my opinion. But that's just with my eyes.
The judge dismisses Joe's claim. On September 24, 2004, the judge delivers the verdict on the Hendrix estate.
In the end, it was ruled that Al's will was, the final will that he signed, was a legal document, and Al was given essentially the right to give the estate to whoever he wanted, and Leon was disinherited from the Jimi Hendrix estate.
The judge also rules to have Janie removed as trustee for some of the trusts, instructing that an independent party is to be appointed.
She lost a few titles she had, which are insignificant, and checks had to be written to cover the places where it was charged off to the wrong place. But there's no pattern here of any conscious pattern of reckless or wrongdoing or any kind of criminality. And there has been no criminal proceedings, of course.
At least $20 to $30 million has been spent on legal bills battling over who owns Jimi Hendrix. It's the single most expensive estate battle in the history of rock and roll other than the Beatles. It seemed to me that they could have settled this out of court for not much money, so it was really a battle of spite to some degree. Some fans wish that the maternal side of Jimi's family, or Leon Hendrix or some of his other relatives, profited. That when you buy a Jimi Hendrix CD at Target now, that money doesn't go to anyone on his maternal side. It doesn't go to Leon Hendrix. It doesn't go to his children. It goes primarily to this family thing controlled by Jimi Hendrix.
Some argue that without Jani at the helm of Jimi's legacy, his music would have been lost.
They brought in Eddie Kramer, who was one of the original engineers and producers of Jimi, and the sound of those re-recordings are fantastic. Some of the previous estates before Jimi Hendrix took over had done some just musical bastardization, where they brought in other musicians to play on some of those albums. And some of the first albums that came out after Jimi's death were just simply horrible and were awful. Most of that has been corrected now, and better versions of those releases have come out. So there have been some great musical things that they've done.
I know Al would have been appalled because he died just before this battle really took place. And my thinking is that Jimi would have wanted all of his family taken care of the best that he could.
My children are angry because they got really cut out. They feel as though they were entitled and they got ripped off, and they're still, angry about it. I let it go.
Even worse for Leon are the rumors that Jimi Hendrix did draw up a will, and that if it had been found, the outcome would have been very different.
There were a number of people who were Jimi's friends, including one of his girlfriends that he was with for a long time, who said that he had a will, but it was never found, never filed.
Leon does win a legal battle in 2011, granting him and his company Rockin' Artwork the right to use Jimi's image and name publicly.
Every time you see his face on something, you know that's Jimi Hendrix, right? So we won that right. That's the only thing we won in court.
The most important thing we won is we gave Leon a stake in Jimi's legacy again. Is the patriarch of the Hendrix family, as his blood brother, as the only guy left running around that knew what it was like to be in a house with Jimi. Now when people are buying, Jimi stuff, wanting to look at Jimi and think about Jimi, they're getting the input and views from Leon on that.
She got the money, it's fine. I got the legacy and the heritage in my heart and in my soul and in my brain, and that's all I need.
Leon also carries on his brother's legacy in a way that Jimi would relate to, through music.
He's a very talented individual because he didn't start playing guitar till later in his life. So for someone at his age to learn the guitar, and he would tell me sometimes when he's on stage, he'll be playing and he'll feel like he's about to mess up, and he closes his eyes and he says, "Oh, Jimi, please help me. And he feels him.
Despite all the legal drama, Jimi Hendrix will still be remembered most for his music.
When we're talking about the greatest guitarist of all time, Jimi Hendrix has to be in that conversation.
His music is both timeless, influential, and if you can really try to pull yourself back as someone that works with music and everything and think about nobody was doing what Jimi did before Jimi did it.
He's still looking out for me because I got a job now. I'm playing music. I travel around the world. I'm not done. I'm getting offers every day to go back, go there, go there. So I'm very blessed. Thank you, Jimi.